Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for a session on smarter giving. We're really glad you made the time, and we're looking forward to spending the next 50 minutes or so together learning about and putting into practice some strategies for giving effectively of your money and your time. My name is Sarah Gelfand, and I'm here today with my colleague, Jen Bahus. We're both part of a team at Fidelity Charitable that works directly with donors to provide personalized support and resources to advance their giving. Jen?
Hi there. Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining. It's a privilege to be with you today, and we're really looking forward to spending this time with you and taking you through some of the work that we have planned. Before we jump in, there are a few things that we want to get started with. And first, and maybe most importantly, we want to take a moment to put some of this work in context and also acknowledge that we are really facing some challenging times right now. Not only are we in the midst of a pandemic that has taken so many lives and livelihoods, but in the US especially, we are in the middle of a national race crisis catalyzed by the death recently of George Floyd. Like so many across this country and really the world, we are saddened and frustrated, but also committed to making change. And it's this desire and the very real need for change that hopefully you feel inspires the work that we do with you here today. During our time together, we are going to invite you to reflect on, articulate, and document the things that really matter to you. We're going to ask you to consider your motivations and your values. And maybe most importantly, we're going to ask you to try to articulate the change you want to see in the world and the role you want to play in making that change. We know that really big problems very rarely have simple or fast solutions, and real change takes time and commitment. And so with the work that we do here today, we hope to, maybe the word is equip you with an action plan so that you can make a commitment to long-term change and have a positive effect on the things that you care most about. So with that, we're going to do a little bit of homework and stage setting to make sure we're all on the same page with the way this session is going to run today. First of all, we'd like to ask you to have something available to take notes with, whether it's a good old-fashioned pen and paper or a device of some sort. Just going to need you to have an opportunity to write some stuff down. We want to make sure you know how to use the chat function. I know at the beginning it was disabled. Is it working now? Okay.
Yes, Jen, it is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great. So I'm sure you're all familiar with that. It's at the bottom of your screen. So we are hoping to have a lot of participation today. So please share with us as we go through this. We ask that you be present with us. We've got about 55, 56 minutes ahead, and there are a lot of distractions, so try to put those distractions away for a short time and be present. We firmly believe that the quality of your presence determines the quality of your experience, and we want you to have a great experience. Likewise, we hope that you participate with us. We hope that you share, and we'll have some polling questions for you to share and also share in the chat box as well. We ask that you also, as you participate, that you're respectful. I think now more than ever, we need to be kind to one another and be patient with one another. So please be respectful in the language that you use. And also, we hope that you have fun. So if everyone agrees to this, we'd like for you now to just go into the chat box and say, yes, I agree, whatever, something in the affirmative, just so we can make sure we're all on the same page.
Thank you.
Awesome, great. Okay, so now we're going to get started. I love seeing all these responses come in. Thank you. Okay, great.
So the objectives for today, and we'll breeze through some of these things, we are going to reflect on the different ways you give of yourself and your resources. As Jen mentioned, there will be some exercise and reflective work. We'll also ask you to reflect on where you want to give, the societal needs that you are most called to respond to, as well as the things that inspire you. And we're going to talk about what goes into making a plan. We want to help you create a plan so you can clarify your goals and commit to them. And then we'll also talk about how to find the right partner organizations to work with to help you to achieve your goals. The exercises and content we're going to discuss are really oriented towards personal and individual giving, but they are broadly extensible. So as you go through these exercises, you can feel free to think about this in the context of your personal giving and personal mission, or as it relates to your professional role. But before we go any further, we'd love to know a little bit more about what motivated you to join today's session. So there's a poll that just popped up. Please take a minute and tell us what was the primary reason you came today. Okay, so we'll just give people 1 more minute to vote here. Great. So it looks like you are here for a variety of reasons. And again, the content is really targeted for folks who have been giving or thinking about giving for a while, as well as for folks who are brand new to this and looking for some tips and best practices. So I hope wherever you are on that continuum, you take the time to use this to refresh and or learn something new and different.
Great. So as we get started, we want to think about all of the various ways to give and the approaches you might take. So let's first take a second and think about the ways that you can give and the resources you might have at your disposal. Generally, when we think about philanthropy and giving, we think primarily about money, and certainly money is important, but there are a lot of ways that you can give back and contribute to causes and organizations you care about. We've got some of them here on the screen. You most definitely can give of your time as a volunteer, your skills. I'm sure everyone has, various skills that nonprofits could most certainly use. And then two that I think we often forget about are our networks and our influence. Many of us are in professional positions where we do have a lot of influence and we know a lot of people. And sometimes even just connecting the right people together can really spur change. So always be mindful of all the various ways that you can contribute that aren't only financial. Then we want to think a little bit about the various approach you can take to your philanthropy and to giving. I'm going to, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to share a little kind of story or parable here that's often associated with this part of the conversation. If you imagine a village, and in this village, there's a river that runs through it. And one day, the people who live in the village notice a baby in a basket floating down the river. And so they take the baby out of the river and they start caring for the baby. And the next day, same thing happens. Another baby is floating down the river and the people in the village start caring for it. Day after day, babies keep coming down the river. And eventually the village is just overwhelmed. They don't have enough people to care for all these babies. They're running out of resources to care for the babies. And someone in the village says, why don't we go up to the start of the river and try to figure out how all of these babies are getting into the river in the first place? And so it's a really simple way of thinking about the various ways that you can support nonprofits and causes, no matter what orientation appeals to you. So remediation, that's this idea that we have an acute need that we need to address right now, right? So get the babies out of the water, start caring for them. But there are all these other things along this continuum that need our support. If we take an issue like homelessness, for instance, for remediation, that's providing shelter and food to people. But also when you think about research, understanding why people are homeless, thinking through mental health and substance abuse issues, understanding that can then lead to perhaps policy changes, better mental health care, could lead to various innovations. And what we think is always really important here is for you to think about which of these approaches best aligns with the way you show up in the world, and also understand that they're not mutually exclusive, right? All of these things kind of need to be happening at the same time, and there are needs in each area. So you don't have to just do one or the other, but there might certainly be one that appeals more to you than others.
Great. So we're going to dig into what goes into a giving plan and pivot from sort of the philosophical anchoring that Jen just did into something a bit more practical. And so we all know that having a plan is important. It helps you stay focused, set goals, set objectives, and then define success. And the same is true in giving and bringing that intentionality to giving. And so we'll talk through all these parts in more detail. And Jen, let's start with a mission. Why do you give?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. As we do this work with other folks, sometimes the word mission might be something that doesn't appeal to you. And if it doesn't, then what we'll ask is that you think about this idea of coming up with a mission or a mission statement as refining your focus or clarifying your intent. Whatever words appeal to you, it's important to understand what you're trying to accomplish with your giving and what's important to you. Not only what you're trying to accomplish, but how are you holding yourself accountable to that? So what we'll do in a bit is just think through what's important to you. What are the issues that you care about, where you want to focus, and also think a little bit about what nonprofits need from you and ways you might be able to partner. So if you already have a mission statement, it's good to keep in mind that it's a good practice to review it regularly. The world changes, you change, your resources change. If you don't have a mission statement, here's some tips for a good way to start crafting a mission statement. Keep in mind, they're usually pretty short, right? 1 to 3 sentences. As I mentioned before, they're living documents. They should grow and change as you grow and change. They describe the core vision, really, again, what you're trying to achieve and why. They include information often about the causes you're trying to support. And they can also include sort of the methodology you want to use when you're going about this, and maybe even measures of success. So at the beginning, we mentioned that we'd like you to have something to take some notes with, and it's time to do that now. So if you don't mind, I'd like for you to take a look at this long list of values and think about from this list, and maybe there's also an other on here. You might have some that aren't represented here. Think about the values that motivate you in your decision making. And that can be your decision making in life, that can be your decision making around your giving specifically. And write down the top 2 to 3 values that motivate you. You might be inclined to say, well, there's 20 on here that motivate me, but we're really trying, again, to focus and to get some clarity. So try to be disciplined and narrow it down. And we'd also love it, not only should you write them down, but we'd love it if you'd share some of them with us in the chat box. Okay. All right, we'll give you a little bit more time.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And then Sarah, I'll pass this over to you to talk a little bit about approach.
So hopefully you've taken your piece of paper, whatever you're writing on, and have documented your values, because we'll come back to them. And now we're going to talk a little bit about your preferred approach, or the style, or the way you like to do things. And these are a few different kind of spectrums where you may find yourself gravitating more towards one or the other. Do you, for example, with your giving and time, prefer to support lower risk but proven programs that have already made a difference and you know they're going to continue to make an impact? Or are you interested more and drawn more to new, different ways of problem solving? Are you somebody who's more private and gives alone and without talking in a lot of with a lot of friends and family? Or are you somebody who likes to give in a giving circle, or more in other social ways? Are you kind of a behind the scenes giver, or somebody who shows up, rolls up your sleeves, volunteers, gets on boards, and plays a more active role? These are just a few places you might identify in terms of approach, but take a minute and think about any one of these or others that define your kind of style of giving, and document that, please. And if you don't mind, share as well in the chat.
Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds here to think about which of these approaches appeal. If anyone does want to share, we'd love to see. There we go, hands-on and collaborative. Medium risk and hands-on. I think that's.
Oh, I love these.
Great. Okay, we'll keep them coming. We're going to go on to the next one for you to think about. And also make sure you've written down the approaches that you feel like are most appealing to you and align with the way you like to operate. And now we'd like to ask you to think a little bit about issue areas. These are just some issue areas. They're also very broad. There might be issue areas that you don't see here that you're very interested in, and you might know exactly what you want to do in a really specific way. But make note of those areas where you want to affect change, again, the causes that you care about. And again, we'd love to see some of those come up in the chat box as well. Well, that's a great one, the intersection of civil rights and healthcare. Oh, yes, so a lot of these do align to the SDGs.
Great.
Great. And we'll move on to the next one. So again, make sure you wrote down your issue areas.
So finally, and take a minute to think about if there's any place, specific community or specific region you want to support. You may not have that be a target for you, but you may. And then are there populations or people you feel most strongly about supporting? For example, personally, I care a lot about supporting children and families in my hometown right now of Durham, North Carolina. So in a second, we're going to document these. You can share them in the chat or just document them in front of you. And Jen, help us put these all together.
Yes. Okay. So I'll just give you a few more seconds. Make sure you've got that down. Again, you might have some populations that aren't reflected here. Feel free, of course, to add. And then as Sarah said, we are going to bring all of this together. We are going to try to, let's see, Tracy is going to add a link in the chat panel that allows you to access a form, a fillable PDF, if you want to use that instead, or you can write this down. And this is just one framework for a mission statement. And I should also say this is not probably going to be your final mission statement. This is just something to get you started down that road if you don't already have a statement. And what you can do is with the work we just did, fill in, my giving is motivated by, and include your values and approach. It is focused on whatever issue areas you identified and targeted for the target populations and geography that you or are oriented to, so that, and this is the big part, right? This is the part, this is your desired outcome. This is the change that you want to see. You might not be able to write that down in the time we have here. You might know it so well, it's really easy. But if you can't do it here, what we hope you'll do is after this session, keep thinking about it, keep working on it in the days, weeks, months to come. So you have something that sort of guides your giving and you can look back on and make sure you're doing what you said you will. And also, it also helps when you're trying to say yes or no to something. If it's really easy, it makes your decision making a bit easier when something aligns with your mission or when it doesn't. Does anyone want to share? I mean, if you have this far enough along that you'd like to share your mission statement with us in the chat box. That's a lot to do, I realize, so that might not be something we're ready for at the moment. Okay, well, we'll move on. If you do, as we're going through, if you feel like sharing your mission statement, we'd love to see it. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about budget and nonprofits. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Jen. So with the sort of foundational why of giving a little bit in place, let's talk a little bit about how much to give. Jen and I talk a lot with donors, and everyone wants to know if they're giving the right amount. And I guess before we dig into this, let's start with a quick poll and ask you all, do you typically set an annual giving budget? Give people a minute to enter their responses. All right, so it looks like you're all sort of all over the place. Some of you regularly set a budget, some of you don't, and some of you do some of the time. So there isn't really a right amount oops, sorry, I just wanted to close that chat, sorry. There isn't really a right amount for any one person to give. It really does depend on your phase of life, how much you feel you can afford to give in any one year. And so we tend not to say this is the guardrail or framework for how to decide how much to give. But what's really important is setting a goal. Just like you might set a saving goal for yourself, having a budget gives you an opportunity to set a target and hold yourself accountable to that. And it can also help you think about, how much you want to do now in a short period of time, but also over the long time. So a few things to think about when budgeting are your time frame, but also the categories of gifts. So you may have just looked at your mission statement issue areas bucket and found that there's more than one issue area you care about. And so how might you think about a relative allocation of the dollars you're going to give across those different issue areas? Another thing that comes up a lot is even the most strategic and planful givers find unexpected events pull them to give. Perhaps COVID is one of those for you, or the recent events Jen mentioned at the top of the call. Alternatively, you may regularly get asked to go to fundraisers or support other causes that matter to family members and other loved ones. And so thinking about strategically, if you have a target budget you can afford and want to strive to give away every year, how might you allocate a portion of that for those friends and family gifts, but also put a stop on it so you're really focusing more on the areas that you're really strategically interested in dedicating time, resources, and mind share to. And so sometimes we talk about an 80-20 split there, but it's really variable. Another thing that I think motivates a lot of people is the idea of making a stretch gift. There may be an organization you've been supporting and working with for a long time, and it may be a goal for you to give them a bigger gift than you've been able to give before. And so planning for that and saving that may be really an important part of how you set a target in your giving plan for the next year or two. As Jen mentioned at the top of the call, there are lots of ways to give. So budgeting is not just something you can think about doing for your money, but it can also be for your time. I have a lot of desire to volunteer, but also limited time. And so I need to set a goal for myself for how to both make sure I prioritize the volunteering that matters to me, both in terms of board service, but also in terms of showing up to a few organizations in my community now, which looks mostly virtual. And I think having a budget for your time is just as important as for your money. And as Jen mentioned before, setting goals for what networks or connections you want to bring to the organizations you care about can also be part of the sort of budget and goal setting you do in that realm. So I want to talk a little bit now about where you'll give. And I should say, as we go through this part, we're sort of talking about some of the tactics and strategies. Please feel free to ask any questions or share any tips you found helpful in the chat. We'd love to hear that. And I just saw somebody shared a mission statement, and thank you. It's a beautiful one. So let's talk about where you will give. If we go to the next slide, and Jen talked a little bit about homelessness at the top of the call. If you identify homelessness as an issue you care about, that's a big challenge. And there are lots of ways you could be supportive of homeless populations and trying to end homelessness. Obviously, providing shelter or housing is a key intervention, but you might also want to contribute to programs that provide job readiness or training to help individuals find work. Also, there's links between homelessness and substance abuse and mental health issues. So you may want to think about upstream interventions that help people before they end up in a position where they are homeless, or downstream interventions once they are homeless to not just focus on shelter, but their medical needs more broadly. So starting with a big challenge and then getting a little more specific about where you want to act. So let's just stick with homelessness and talk specifically about shelter. Then we're thinking about the places where you want to focus. Maybe you want to focus in your community. If that's a big city, maybe there are lots of homeless organizations. Maybe you want to focus even more particularly on a specific segment of the population, like veterans or homeless shelters for women and families affected by domestic violence. And that narrowing and winnowing process both gives you more clarity on what you're trying to do, but also winnows down the universe of institutions that might be good matches for your support and time. Next slide. But even still, a lot of folks wonder how to find which nonprofits are most effective. What are other ways, once they've narrowed down the funnel, to know if a nonprofit is doing good work? So when Jen and I work with donors, next slide, we look at a few key areas where we recommend donors spending some time thinking about how to assess organizational effectiveness. And before I talk about those, I'd love to hear from you all. What kinds of resources do you find valuable when you research nonprofits? And we're going to launch a poll here. Which of these, and you may use all of these, you may use some of these, but which ones do you find most valuable when you're trying to figure out if you want to get more involved in working with or supporting a nonprofit? Okay. Give it one more minute here. Great. So it looks like a lot of you are familiar with nonprofit research sites. Others of you use the web and just look at what nonprofits share on their website. And then many of you are comfortable visiting nonprofits and speaking with staff members, which is great. These are all really effective strategies. And so let's talk a minute about the kinds of things that are helpful to look into. These three areas are sort of three pillars of things that we think about: programs the organization runs, its financial health, and its team and leadership. So what are the specific programs? What evidence does the organization have that the programs are achieving results? The questions kind of listed here are the kinds of questions you might ask a nonprofit staff member at an organization you're looking to learn more about. But as we were just talking about, a lot of information about how to evaluate an organization's programs can be found on their website, and especially transparent organizations provide not just their programs and what they do, but their results as well. Financial health is another area that's important to look at. What are the organization's finances? Do they raise money from a diverse set of funders? Do they consistently keep their expenses in line with their revenue? Many nonprofits publish their 990 or their audited financials on their website, and it's usually pretty easy to see how they're managing their budget using those tools. Additionally, most nonprofits list their funders and supporters, and you can get a sense of how diverse their funding base looks. Finally, what does the team look like? Do they have the relevant professional and lived experiences to do the work they intend to do? Are they diverse both in perspectives and backgrounds, both at the leadership levels and at the board levels? I think increasingly funders are asking and expecting nonprofit leadership at the end boards to reflect the constituents they aim to serve. So these are a few dimensions of how to assess a nonprofit. It's the effectiveness of its work. I'm seeing some questions come through, and I just want to take a minute. And somebody asked a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, also referred to as DEI. And I think, the question also is, do any of the donors that Jen and I work with care about those issues? And I think the answer is definitely yes, and it's variable, the extent to which it ends up being a primary focus of one's giving, but certainly donors do ask and care about both the diversity of the staff and the organization's commitment to learning about and embracing race and equity and inclusivity in their culture and the culture overall of the organization.
It's a great question.
Yeah, keep them coming. So the next question is another poll. So I want to ask you all to take a look at this set of costs and answer which of these costs you think are helpful or can help organizations in achieving impact. people just another minute. Okay. So there's some mixed responses here, with almost half of you saying that you think all of these can help an organization achieve impact, and others a little bit less sure. So I just want to take a minute and note that these first three items, executive director salary, office space, and sort of marketing awareness raising, are items that can be considered overhead. And overhead in a lot of nonprofit reporting is defined as the percentage of the charity's expenses that go to administrative and fundraising costs. And many, historically, I think folks have challenged or asked whether overhead expenses how to balance overhead expenses and how to think about the rate of the organization's budget that goes to overhead versus direct programmatic support. But I'd like to encourage you that focusing a little bit too much on overhead can be stifling for nonprofits. It can hold them back from having the access to the resources they need to invest in themselves, invest in the systems that fuel their growth, and invest in ways that would allow them to ultimately deliver their programs more effectively and efficiently in the future. And so I put this up here both to encourage you that when you think about how and where to provide support, I'd ask you not to overlook the importance of giving nonprofits the flexibility and freedom to use funds and resources in the way they need. Of course, it's important to make sure that costs are prudent, but it's hard for an organization to get the message out about their work and grow their programs if they can't invest in marketing. And it's hard for them to do their work if they don't have a good space to do it, although perhaps this virtual work environment may change some of that. And of course, talent is key to running any kind of organization, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit.
Yeah, and Sarah, I just want to jump in. One of the questions that came in, what turns off your potential donors? And we've all heard about the overhead myth. I think it's really interesting because no matter, I mean, even really sophisticated donors often still are turned off by the idea of supporting overhead. And there's always a conversation, or not always, often a conversation that we still need to have. So I don't know if you want to answer that as well, Sarah, but I think the overhead myth, maybe for those in the field, is something that we're used to. We've kind of accepted that it's a myth, but it still, I think, is some education is required for a lot of donors.
I agree. And I think for those of you who are attending this and are representative of nonprofits that are regularly trying to raise funding from donors, I think one of the topics we'll get to next is kind of sharing results and thinking about success. And I think part of what I hear from a lot of donors is that if they start from a position of distrust, it's because they don't feel that the relationship with the nonprofit partner has been one of candor and openness. And so I do think there are opportunities in your relationships and developing partnerships with donors from the nonprofit side to bring that candor and openness and own what's working well and share what's not. And the candor and openness in the dialogue can, I think, build trust. We had, there's some research underway that our Fidelity Charitable trustees have funded, looking at what holds donors back from giving unrestricted multi-year grants. And by that, I mean the stuff I just talked about, giving money to a nonprofit over a long period of time so they can have that predictable cash flow, and also giving them money so they can choose where they need it most rather than having it be dictated by a specific programmatic need at that moment in time. And I think what we heard several donors say, and it's still a small sample, the research is still in flight, but is that if they were asked by nonprofits, they would think more to give in that way. And so I think nonprofit fundraisers can be more transparent about asking for the kind of money they need rather than trying to pitch specific projects. And I think I'm hopeful it will yield good results. So thanks again for these questions. I'm so appreciative of your engagement during this conversation. And we'll just pivot now for kind of to think about how you will define success. I think I'm preaching to the choir on unrestricted funding. I love these notes coming in. So, you know, when we talk to donors, I think this is a big conversation, right? Success metrics are hard. Measuring in social impact is vexing and multi-layered. But what a lot of donors, I think, struggle with is, if I've made a grant to a nonprofit, how am I going to decide whether I should grant to them again next year when I'm solicited for another funding, for more funding? And of course, donors, and for those of you who are putting on your donor hat, need to sort of think about right-sizing their request for data with the size of the gift they're making. But certainly, you can find a lot of information about the scope and breadth and growth and impact of a nonprofit's programs on their website if they are a transparent and strong reporting organization, which many good nonprofits are. But you can also reach out and ask for information. Many folks prefer qualitative stories and not just the quantitative insights. And many can ask for progress reports from nonprofits to just stay more regularly informed about what's happening. And to the conversation we were just having about what nonprofits need to invest in to grow their work, you could consider supporting an investment in a measurement program so that a nonprofit has the data systems, the survey mechanisms, and the evaluation capabilities to report and track results going forward. I'm going to hand it back to you, Jen, and let's see if any other questions come in.
Yeah, let's think about that. Let's look and see if there's any other questions. Yeah, we can use the Q&A tool to ask questions or the chat. If you are thinking of questions, we still have some time, but one of the things we'd like you to do after going through this work and kind of going through the steps to think about how you can create an actionable giving plan. If we were together in a room, we would ask you now to stand up, all of us together, and articulate to our group what our commitment is that we could do in the next month that helps us along on our path to achieving our goals, whatever they were that we set out. We're not together in person, but what we'd like to do now is to ask you to share in the chat box one thing that you can commit to doing in the next month based on today's conversation, the reflections that you had, to help you start to take action on the change that you hope to see. And it could be as simple as a virtual volunteering opportunity, or sitting down with your kids and talking about some of these issues that are going on in the world or that are important to you. But we'd like for you to share. We find that when you kind of articulate something and say it out loud, you hold yourself a bit more accountable. It might be just that you want to continue refining your mission statement after this. There you go.
Oh, I love that.
Draft a family mission statement.
Mm.
We've been having a lot of conversations, I'm sure everyone has, about the quote, hard conversations. I think that is really important. Stay focused and intentional. We talk about intentional so much, and really, even for yourself, understanding your intent and staying focused. I love that. Diversify your volunteer efforts.
Oh, I love the recurring need. Yeah, these are wonderful commitments.
And check, if you want to be sharing this with everyone, make sure you're selecting share with all panelists and attendees. Educating yourself, that's great.
I am really inspired by these comments. I'm so glad you guys are sharing.
Okay, well, also, open it up to any other questions that you might have. And you can put those either in the Q&A box, or we can, since we have some time, you can also put them in the chat and we can try to address them right now. One that came into the Q&A box is 2020 has been crazy. That is an understatement for sure. How should you plan for so many urgent needs while staying true to your intended giving mission? That's a great question. I think, Sarah, you kind of touched on that a little bit when you were talking about budget, but do you want to answer that question or give your perspective?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess I would say for those of us that have the means to be exploring that question and the financial resources to perhaps dig a bit deeper, there are times when giving feels like it's worth doubling down on, and I think 2020 is one of those years. I'll talk about these, and your comments really reflect this, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways we've been thinking about helping donors navigate giving during the coronavirus crisis, and we can also talk about equity. But when we've been looking at the ways to organize strategies for responding to coronavirus and its impact on nonprofits, we've been thinking about obviously supporting for health interventions and health supplies for frontline workers. We've been talking about the need to support particularly vulnerable populations, folks who need food and in many cases cash to just keep going. And third, we've been talking about how to sustain nonprofits generally. And so whether you're a zoo or an art museum or a or a health center or a food kitchen, a food bank, you are experiencing difficult times right now, either because of excessive demand or because you've had to shutter your doors. And if one of those types of organizations I've talked about is one you've had a longstanding commitment to, showing up and being a partner donor to that organization through this time is really worth doing. There are many organizations who are feeling particularly vulnerable. They can't fundraise the same ways they've used to. They don't know how to continue to get the support from donors that they've depended on. And if there's an organization that you love and care about, I think it's a really great use of your charitable funds to double down on your commitment to them and help them weather what may be a difficult period for them financially. But I'll also say that this coronavirus crisis has surfaced a lot of sort of underlying issues that are the drivers for many people's philanthropy, whether it's inequities, racially or otherwise, socioeconomically. And perhaps the giving is not sort of disaster specific or response specific, but is really about bringing, as several of you wrote, a different kind of focus, an equity focus to your work, and asking whether the interventions you're supporting or the nonprofits you're supporting are the ones that are best positioned to meet the needs in your community. I'll just share a personal example here. I have long been a supporter of our local homeless shelter for a lot of the reasons that I think many people care about supporting homelessness in their community. But I also, during COVID, realized that there is an after-school program that works in a really tough part of our town that has struggled to get the funding they've needed and has not been able to run the program. And they check a lot of my boxes for things I'm personally cared about. They're run by a woman of color. They are an organization that specifically serves and provides mentorship to kids of color in low-income communities in our town. And they were an organization I was excited to try and support more of. They may not seem like your average COVID response grantee, but they met that for me. And so I guess it's probably a long-winded answer to your question, but maybe in summary, double down where if you can, and think about how to be a partner to organizations you've cared about, and be open to looking in new areas too.
And I'll also just add on to that, because the question was, how do you stay true to your intended giving mission? And I think maybe that just requires a little bit too of thinking about your giving mission, as we mentioned, can be something that evolves. And also if it's based on your values, I think your values probably remain consistent, and then there are a lot of ways you can address those values through a mission. And likewise, I mean, just in a really tactical way, as Sarah, when she was talking about budget, as you're making a plan and you're thinking through your budget, it's really important to put money aside for those things that are unexpected, right? So I think you can remain true to your mission, especially if it's grounded in your values, and still address things that might be unexpected throughout the year. There was one other thing. Oh, I love that in the chat box someone said, can we be accountability partners, right? The other attendees. And I think that's an awesome way to look at these groups. And hopefully in some of your networking that you're doing in these sessions, you can connect with one or two or three or more people and hold each other accountable. I know for sure in person, we definitely see that, and we share everyone's information, and people stay in touch, and we even check in with people. So that's a great idea, and I think something that you guys should definitely do. And we can as well. We'd love to stay in touch.
We can be your accountability buddy.
Yeah. All right, if there are any other questions, we can certainly take them.
If not, thank you for joining. Thank you for participating and going through this exercise with us all. And
yeah, we enjoyed it. I hope you
did
too. And we'll send the materials out and make them available to you. And really thank you for your participation. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the Social Innovation Summit.